Chapter 9. 3 nights later, on Thursday, I had a late dinner with Leo. We went to a delicious, small, inexpensive Japanese place. It was right next door to a delicious, large, expensive Japanese place. The expensive place was always packed. The inexpensive place was always empty. Leo and I could never figure out why or how it stayed in business. We speculated that the same people owned both and that somehow the losses from one helped with the taxes from the other. During dinner, we drank Asahi, which is good as long as it's ice cold. It was. I told Leo about the Penworths. After dinner, we drank tea and Leo reminisced about his former student. Sometime after 11 o'clock, we said goodnight and I grabbed the R train uptown. The subway that night was strangely deserted, with only lone travelers preoccupied with books and magazines or simply staring at the floor. Times Square station was close to empty. 2 transit cops stood silently at the top of the stairs as I transferred to the Uptown 1 train. They could have been statues, and didn't glance at me or the other passers-by as we moved through their field of vision. A lone flautist echoing from the far end of the downtown platform only increased my sense of isolation as I waited. After 5 minutes, a local train arrived, and I took it, needing to keep moving, not wanting to wait for the express. At 72nd Street, I got off and escaped up into the night air. Broadway, too, was uncharacteristically deserted, except for Gray's Papaya on the corner to my right, teeming with life as always, models mingling with bums, mixing with businessmen, eating the incomparable hot dogs 24 hours a day. I resisted the urge to run across the street and grab one, feel the snap of the skin on my teeth. The aroma of beef and fat was a siren song even on a full stomach. I cut north across 72nd through Verdi Square and up the west side of Amsterdam. At 75th, I paused in front of Tempo, where Alex had tended bar until he was fired. I peered through one of the plate glass windows. There was activity inside. Whatever was slowing down the rest of the city had no effect here, and I wondered what the allure was. I knew it was trendy, but I had never been in. The idea of trolling in bars for what passes as romance has never appealed to me. I find loneliness more bearable if I'm actually alone, rather than alone in the midst of a crowd of other lonely people. Sometimes I'll watch a movie with the sound turned off. It's something I learned from Leo, an assignment he gives to his acting classes. He says you can judge the acting much better that way. Without the distractions of dialogue, music, and Foley, it's easier to see the seamless work of the true artist, the false technique of the hack. Looking inside at the crowded bar was like working that exercise. I saw patrons engaged in animated conversation. Music was playing, and my fingertips could feel, faintly, the bass line through the plate glass. Some people were moving to the beat. Inside, I would hear the tinkling of silverware on plates, the clinking of glass on glass. But without the distraction of all of the noise, I could see the loneliness on the faces, desperation in the eyes, the falseness of the smiles. A limousine pulled to the curb behind me. The driver hopped out and ran around to open the rear curbside door. 2 men in their early 30s emerged, dressed in well-cut Italian suits, laughing lewdly, helping their dates out. 2 beautiful women in their early 20s, model thin, not dressed for the cold weather. Still laughing, they headed into Tempo. On a whim, I caught the door before it shut and followed them. There was the attractive hostess wearing a short dress and ready smile. As the men requested a table, I caught her eye and inclined my head to the right, towards the barroom, questioning her with my eyebrows. She nodded almost imperceptibly before she turned the high beams of her graciousness back on the party of 4. I squeezed past and headed for the bar, which took up the two back walls of the room that opened up to the right of the hostess station. It was crowded, and all of the stools at the 3 or 4 tall freestanding tables were taken. I managed to nab a lone seat at the bar near the end. The bartender approached. He was in his early 30s and had a ruddy face that looked like it leaned more toward easy embarrassment than quick anger. "What can I get you?" he asked as he set a napkin down in front of me. It had the Tempo logo on it, a stylized martini glass. Ordered a pint. The best beers in the country, some of the best in the world, are coming from San Diego County right now, and I do love my hops. I turned on my stool to look past the hostess station to the large split-level dining room beyond. The lower level looked completely full. The upper level was only partially visible through the archways in the wall, but I could see the waitstaff from the shoulders up as they took orders and served drinks, so it must have been fairly full as well. Brisk business for a Monday night. The crowd was mostly mid-30s to late 40s, dressed either very well or with the kind of studied casualness that can be very expensive. They ate, talked, and laughed with forced gusto, as if they had been ordered to enjoy. I spotted a couple of minor celebrities at two of the tables in the main dining room, and a very famous film star standing beside a table of 6. He finished a story, everyone laughed appropriately, and he strode back to his table in the more private dining area. My beer arrived. I took a swallow and surveyed the barroom. This crowd was more frantic, more bent on reaching a good time, with more ground to cover to get there. A movement caught my eye, the turn of a head a little too quick, a woman talking to 2 men, her back to me. I took another sip of my beer and watched. From the looks on their faces, these guys were smitten. A burst of laughter erupted from the party to her left, and someone jostled her, forcing her to turn, giving me a glimpse of profile. She was stunning and looked familiar, but I couldn't figure out from where. Odd that I couldn't place a woman that beautiful. I'm usually pretty good at remembering the truly important things. Then she glanced my way. Our eyes locked for just a moment, and she quickly returned her attention to the 2 men. I stood, threw some bills on the bar, and picked up my beer. As I threaded my way through the crowd, she glanced at me again, and her eyes lit up. "There you are!" she cried. She said something to the men and edged quickly to kiss with a delicious mouth. She squeezed the back of my neck hard as she whispered in my ear, "Don't say a fucking word." She spun on her heel, pulling me behind her by the hand. We passed her companions, and she let loose a peal of laughter. "Sorry, fellas, but I haven't seen this guy for ages, and we've got some catching up to do. I'll see you around," she said, and we were out the door. She still had hold of my hand, a woman dressed to the nines, even if you don't have any idea who the hell she is, so I began to reciprocate. She broke it off and spun me around, my back to the restaurant. "Not here," she said as she waved over my shoulder to the guys. She put her arm around my waist and pulled me quickly down the street. I followed, or rather, let her drag me to the corner, where she hauled me a few steps down 76th and pushed me into a dark alleyway where the only light was cast by a single bulb above an apartment building's service entrance at the far end. She was backlit by a street lamp near the entrance to the alley, and I couldn't see her face. "What the fuck are you doing in there?" "Excuse me?" I said. She stepped towards me. "I asked what the fuck you were doing in there." Having a drink?" "Don't get smart with me." She straight-armed me farther into the alley. "If you're dicking around with this, you're in big trouble." I was starting to be less amused. It's one thing to be kissed and manhandled by a beautiful, sexy stranger, and another to be threatened by her. "I don't know what the hell you're talking about." "Don't fuck with me," she said, shoving me again. The tone of voice and her language completely belied the refined image projected by the woman I had seen in the bar. "Excuse me," I said, "but who the fuck are you?" "What?" Who the fuck are you and what the fuck are you talking about? She took another step forward. I wasn't exactly afraid of her, but if I stood my ground and she pushed me again, I might have to give her a good one back. I didn't want to do that. She was so small, so I took a quick step back. My foot landed on a piece of pipe. It skittered out from under me, and I went down as quickly as if I'd hit a patch of ice. I tried to arch my back to keep myself upright, and the first thing to hit the pavement was my head. I heard the crack, felt the dull, penetrating vibration of the impact, and a sharp, searing pain. A twin star revolved in the night sky, and two women loomed over me, speaking words I couldn't understand, could barely hear. The twin star slowly resolved itself into the single bulb above the service entrance, and then one of the women was gone. I could hear the remaining one more clearly, speaking from the end of a long corrugated steel tunnel. "Zach, are you all right? Mm. Does your neck hurt? Mm. Damn it. Just lie still for a minute." She put a hand on my chest. "That must have knocked the wind out of you." Mm. She kneeled over me, looking into my eyes. She raised one hand and blocked the light from the bulb, putting one of my eyes into shadow, then moved her hand and repeated this motion a few times with that eye, then again with the other. "Does your neck hurt? Yeah. Can you sit up? Yeah. Okay, let's try it nice and easy." She put one hand behind my head at the base of my skull and wrapped her other arm around me to support me from behind my shoulders. Her face was next to mine, and I could smell her perfume, dark and spicy, as she pulled me up into a sitting position on the pavement. She sat back on her heels and held my neck, kneading, probing gently with her fingers. The light finally caught her face, and it hit me. The police station, before my meeting with Cynthia and the two homicide dicks. She pulled her hand away from my neck and held it up in front of her. It was covered with blood. "Shit," she said. "Is that mine?" "It would appear so. It looks like you hit the remains of a beer bottle when you went down. God damn it, now I've got to fill out a shitload of reports." "Yeah, not to mention dealing with IAB and a brutality investigation." "You're kidding, right? That might be tough to pull off. I've got witnesses who saw us smooching on our way out of that restaurant and up the street." "Well, if there's more smooching to look forward to, I might be persuaded to drop the charges." "Shut the fuck up," she said. "Turn around. I want to see how bad it is." I complied. "Sally, right?" I asked as she probed the back of my head to get a good look. "Yeah, good memory." "So, Sally, what do we do now?" "We get you to the hospital for some stitches." "And then?" I asked, turning back to her. She was digging in her shoulder bag. She pulled out some paper napkins and handed them to me. "And then you go home and forget this ever happened." "Don't you want to answer some questions first?" I asked, pressing the napkins to the back of my head. "Not likely. Even with those brutality charges looming over you, you got hurt because of your own clumsiness." "Clumsiness? I was trying to protect you." "Protect me?" "Yeah. If you'd pushed me again, I would have had to hit you." "Now that would have been interesting." "Yeah. I've never assaulted a police officer before. I haven't kissed one either." She stood and looked down at me. "Can you stand up?" "I think so." She helped me to my feet, and the alley listed a little to the left, then righted itself. Sally kept one hand on my elbow and guided me to the street. We turned left towards Broadway, where she hailed a cab and told the driver to take us to Roosevelt Hospital. We were silent during the ride, and as she paid the driver, I caught up to her in front of the emergency room and grabbed her elbow. "Hold on a second." "What?" "I want to know what's going on here. Why did you pull me out of there so fast? Why the getup?" "Getup?" "Yeah, the hair, the makeup, the outfit. It's not you." "You don't know who the fuck I am." She yanked her arm out of my grasp. "I know you're a cop," I said. "That's right, and I was doing my job." "Which is what?" right now. None of your goddamn business. I think when your CO gets the full story of my injuries and how I got them, you're going to have more trouble than filling out a few forms. Let me explain something to you, smart guy. You have two choices. One, I deliver you into the hands of a competent doctor. I disappear, and we pretend that this never happened. You don't ask me any questions. You never go into tempo again. Two, you insist on being a pain in my ass, and I arrest you for interfering with a police officer in the performance of her duties. Then I haul your ass in for questioning about what the hell you were doing in tempo tonight and what the hell you had to do with the death of Alex Penworth. Take your pick. She clearly had the advantage. I was bleeding profusely from a head wound. Blood had already soaked through the napkins and started to trickle down my back. I didn't know what the hell she was talking about. She had a badge and a gun. Maybe two. Oh well. Live dangerously. Which one of my options is most likely to lead to more smooching? She didn't even crack a smile. She just shook her head, pointed to the emergency room doors, and said, "March." She sounded serious, so I marched. Inside, the security guard looked at me impassively from behind his desk. I waved the bloody napkins at him, and he nodded towards a doorway. I walked through it into a waiting room. A sign above a reception window said, "Triage." Next to the window was another sign saying, "Sign in," with a red arrow pointing at a clipboard. I filled in my name, time of arrival, and the nature of my complaint. I looked through the doorway next to the window. The triage nurse was speaking to a young Latino who held a girl of about 4 on his lap. She had tear-stained eyes and a severe bruise on her forehead. The nurse and the man were having language difficulties. The nurse was trying to get the young man to be patient, and at the same time yelling into the phone at some guy named Jorge to stop being such a bitch and get down here to help translate. I finished signing in and walked over to sit next to Sally in a row of molded plastic seats that were bolted together. She leafed through an issue of Woman's Day. Minutes passed. I felt the blood congeal as it continued to trickle down my back. I shifted in my plastic seat and felt my shirt peel away from the skin, felt the pull of the congealing fabric on the tiny hairs on my back. Sally pretended to be engrossed in her magazine. I took the opportunity to look her over. It was easy to do in the stark light of the hospital waiting room. The woman sitting next to me bore no resemblance to the tomboy I had encountered in the police station the week before. She sat with her legs crossed away from me, which, to hear the shrinks tell, is significant. She wore fashionable pumps, very high of heel, that accentuated a pair of finely turned ankles, neither of which sported a holster. Even though it was quite cold out, she was not wearing stockings, and the skin of her calves was smooth, giving way to the gentle down of peach fuzz on well-toned thighs that disappeared beneath the raw silk of a short bronze skirt. She wore a wide black leather belt and a short-fitted black leather jacket over a cream-colored blouse. No sign of the Glock anywhere, so I assumed it was in the oversized leather bag on the seat next to her. Her black hair was very straight, cut with bangs, and it hid her face as she tilted it down over the magazine. "You don't seem like the Woman's Day type." "How the hell would you know?" "Well, when I met you the other day, you looked much more East Village, albeit heavily armed. This expensive ensemble you're sporting now, the vampy red lipstick and the perfectly matched nail polish, all bespeak a level of breeding which is belied by your liberal use of expletives. That, taken together with your efforts tonight to get me out of the bar before I spoke to you, well, I can only deduce that this is some sort of disguise, some clever ploy to escape detection." I looked down at the article she was reading. "Penny pinching pasta? How deep undercover are you trying to go? You don't quit, do you?" "Depends on who you talk to," I said. And then the triage nurse called my name. I crossed to his cubicle and sat. He looked at the cut on my head, took my temperature and blood pressure, asked if I had any allergies, was taking any drugs or medications. I answered no to everything. Well, that cut looks nasty, he said as he filled out a form. How'd you do that? We were horsing around and I tripped on a piece of pipe. I landed on a piece of broken beer bottle. Well, you're going to need some stitches. How long has it been since your last tetanus booster? I don't know. Well, then you'll need one of those too. Do you want a plastic surgeon for the stitches? Why would I want that? Well, I don't like to tell tales out of school, but the plain old ER residents here will just stitch you up all willy-nilly, and that could leave a nasty scar. Or you might get a clumsy PA. A plastic surgeon will do lots of teensy-weensy stitches or do something else that I don't know anything about, and you won't have hardly any scar at all. They have their ways, you know. I'm sure they do, but what I meant was, why would I want to go to all that trouble? The scar's going to be hidden by my hair. Well, you never know. There are all kinds of hairstyles these days. You might want to shave your head someday, or you might lose it. My head? Well, no, your hair, I mean to say. No, that's all right. I'll take whoever I get. Well, all righty. Any questions? Just one. Do you start every sentence with well? He smiled. Well, I guess I do, Mr. Smarty Pants. Now, why don't you go sit at that desk over there and give the clerk your insurance information? I'll be sure that some Hungarian butcher comes by shortly to staple your head back together. I gave the clerk my insurance ID. She typed up an intake form and attached an ID bracelet to my wrist, then handed me an embossed red plastic card and told me to keep it. It was my permanent hospital ID card, and I would need it on further visits. I told her I wasn't planning on making any further trips to the emergency room. She said no one ever does, and told me to go back into the waiting room. I returned to my seat next to Sally and waited in silence while she read her magazine. I stared at the wall. If she was going to ignore me, I wasn't going to make it easier for her. After nearly half an hour of this standoff, the swinging door at the end of the room opened, and my name was called by a young Asian woman in scrubs holding a clipboard. She introduced herself as Roseanne and told me to follow her, which I did. When I returned to the waiting room 45 minutes later, stitched, bandaged, and follow-up instructed, it was empty. Tim, the triage nurse, looked up from his cubicle. How did you know she was a cop? I made the mistake of telling her that it would be okay if she wanted to go back to see her boyfriend before she left. Well, I said, she must have loved that. Well, yes, he smiled. She did. Thanks, I said. No problemo. You take care. I will. You too. Outside, the night air had a biting chill that I felt everywhere but the back of my head. As I walked home, I reviewed the night's events and felt renewed anger at the kiss-off Cynthia and I had gotten from the cops. Cynthia was right. Something was off about Alex's death. And that's the end of Chapter 9. If you haven't already, click the little bell, subscribe to this channel, and you'll get notifications all of the upcoming readings. And also, don't forget to go over to my website, MatthewArkin.com, and sign up for my newsletter.